Top Talk. I'm here today with renowned author Kerry Zukas, who wrote the book Inside the Hotel Rwanda, apparently causing a lot of stir, and we know how much you love drama. So, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about yourself and the book that you've written that has been causing a lot of drama for yourself, for your life.
Well, the name of the book is Inside the Hotel Rwanda, The Surprising True Story and Why It Matters Today. It's one of many books that I've written over my career. Generally speaking, while I have written a few books on my own, I'm what they call a collaborative author. In this case, I worked with Edward Kayahura, who is a native Rwandan, who is someone who was one of the actual survivors from inside the Hotel Rwanda, which is actually the Hotel Milkaline in Kigali, Rwanda. And this is during the period of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda of 1994.
Why would you delve in this type of writing? It's so controversial, you can say, because you're an author who has written for many other people. You're a ghostwriter. You've written for other people, other types of stories. Why this one? How did it affect you personally as well as you were writing it?
Well, Edward came to me through my agent, and it just sounded like such an utterly fascinating story. It's not just his personal story, though that's a large part of it. It's written from his point of view. But also I came in contact with so very many other people who survived that horrific situation. And I was just shocked, as most Americans. I had seen the movie. It's an acclaimed movie. It's wonderfully filmed, wonderfully acted, Don Cheadle, Nick Nolte, and had assumed it was absolutely true. The movie itself never puts any disclaimers on it saying based on a true story, inspired by a true story. There's no wiggle room at all. And it's currently being used in classrooms around America. So, like most people, I assumed, well, it's got to be true. And when I'm hearing from Edward and others that absolutely not at all true, I was shocked and dismayed. And it led me on to a very incredible journey in the creation of the book, which went on for about 6 or 7 years.
You know, I'm listening to you talk, and a lot of the things that are going through my head is, you know, the racism that still goes on today in our own country.
Absolutely.
Which basically, I hate to put it like this, but that's where it derived, you know? And I hope that a lot of people realize that and don't forget that. How do we find a way to correct ourselves in this country when it comes to a situation like that? You know, I don't really see like a clear answer as to just a matter of respecting people.
Well, I think the answer is if we really think about, frankly, some of the only positive things that came out of that movie was that it did focus on the fact that the genocide really came from hate speech and a culture of ethnic hatred. To understand the ridiculousness of what happened in Rwanda in '94, imagine if we were to say that Italian Americans were suddenly going to declare a war, a genocide on Irish Americans. And we can say that, you know, perhaps there are certain cliched physical traits of, you know, the Irish versus the Italian. There are, of course, we all probably know, and again through intermarriage and so on, we probably know Italians with red hair and freckles, and we probably know Irish with dark hair and so on. And it becomes that ridiculous, again, as the word that would best describe it. But there was a culture that was developed in that country after the colonialist period. And it really did pit one group against the other, even though, again, they intermarried, they looked the same by and large. And when we see that and hear hate speech and, you know, hate policies going on in our country today, we can see the rabbit hole down which this can all lead. And when I listen to a lot of American radio and I hear some of the hate speech, especially a lot of the virulent speech that we hear. And I don't mean to get too political here, but I think on the far right. Yeah, I mean, well, when we hear about certain things, like we heard from Ted Nugent this past week, calling the President of the United States a subhuman mongrel. That is exactly the sort of thing that was on radio in Rwanda leading up into this genocide. So it's horrific, and now we can see exactly where that can go.
Do you think that when people talk in this manner that it gives other people permission? Because really, when all of us are born, we don't know anything about hate.
Correct.
We know about being reliant on the human being that's taking care of us, our mother, our father, our adopted mother, whoever that may be. So, how is it that somebody grows up and becomes aware, and then they hear somebody else and it just gives permission and trickles down? Because I look at it like this: if the president were white, would we still be carrying on with the same hate?
You're absolutely right. And there's some things in the book that we talk about. There is a terrorist army called the FDLR, which is led primarily by the former leaders of the genocide of 1994. They are in the Congo, in eastern Congo. There have been requests by the UN or movement within the UN to try to disarm them. Paul Rusesabagina, who is the star, the real-life star of the movie Hotel Rwanda, has come out very recently and said, oh no, we really should not disarm them. Why would you not disarm a terrorist army? Now, let me describe when I say a terrorist army. This, again, that designation comes from the UN. It's not my personal words. Furthermore, there have been some analysis of this group that, again, we cover this in our book. They use child soldiers, which is, again, a very major world issue right now. These are kids who are raised and from birth told, you must hate the Tutsi. The two groups in Rwanda that were involved in the genocide were the Hutu and the Tutsi. The Hutu that were plotting the destruction of the entire Tutsi race. So you've got these young Hutu children in eastern Congo being handed weapons from birth and being told from birth, you must go back into your native land, a land they've never seen because they were born. These are kids who were not around in '94. They were born in the Congo and told, you have to go back into Rwanda and you must kill all Tutsi. So that's your whole learned hate. I mean, there it is in a nutshell. And Paul Rusesabagina has spoken out in support of this very terrorist army that uses these tactics.
But it's frightening, because where does that chain break off where, like, a child that's growing up and saying, maybe I'm wrong in thinking that a child would have, like, some kind of common sense that something would click in the head and say, why are we doing this?
Indoctrination. That's the only answer. Again, if this is all you're taught from birth, if you're not going, these kids are not going to public schools, they're not getting a well-rounded education. This is the classic homeschooled situation where the only schooling is the indoctrination into this ideology of hate. And it's terrible, absolutely terrible.
Okay. I have some questions here for you that I wanted to ask in regards to your book that you wrote. How did the idea originate? And what's the story behind this book? Like, is it your story? Is it somebody else's story? Or is it a collaboration of both? Are your feelings mixed in there?
Well, it's certainly not my story. It's told from the viewpoint of Edouard, who, again, is a native Rwandan who was in the hotel. And I really act as a conduit there. Edouard had been very square with me right from the start. He said, I want an American co-author. English is his fourth language. I mean, how many of us even speak 4 languages fluently? He does, but
wow.
English is number 4. So he said, I want a writer who's going to be involved, who's going to not just be a ghostwriter behind the scenes, but who's going to get deeply involved with me in this. And the more he talked about his personal experience and what has happened since the movie, again, not just the fact that the movie is fact deficient, but also what Paul Rusesabagina has been preaching since he became rich and famous because of the film, just drew me in. And I just got on board very enthusiastically because I think Edouard is on a noble mission, because everybody wants the star of the movie to come to their college, to their church, wherever, and speak. This is a man who hands out a business card that says occupation humanitarian. I mean, I don't think Martin Luther King Jr., I don't believe that Gandhi walked around, Bono walked around handing out business cards that said that's who they were. And that's,
right.
And especially when, in this case, upon research, every person who was in that hotel who he alleged to have saved said, no, it didn't happen that way, not at all. He's not that person who was on the screen. But they haven't been given a voice. America does not know. And yet, again, this film is being used in classrooms in nearly every high school and college in this entire country, in North America.
So you're saying the film is not accurate, that's what you're saying?
Absolutely, positively not. I must give it its kudos. It is the first and possibly only major Hollywood film that even tackled this subject. For that, I say fantastic. Mm-hmm. It was directed by a future Academy Award winner, Terry George, an Irish filmmaker. What he had to say within the film about the genocide itself is spot on. We have no qualm about that. I don't think Terry George is a bad person. But where there was a letdown, and I don't know whether we should put the blame on Terry George, on Paul Rusesabagina, on Hollywood, because I think there was some deals with the devil that had to be made in order to get this made. Because when you take the Rusesabagina storyline within that famous movie, it really is almost like a Die Hard movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole single hero, saves the lives of 1,200 people all by himself, unarmed man against armies and terrible people. I mean, it really could have starred Bruce Willis and
right.
had explosions and everything. Cinematically, they didn't go that way, but the storyline is identical. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's what had Hollywood lapping it up and saying, okay, let's greenlight this movie. But if that was the way it had to go, there should have been warnings all over the front and back end of the film saying, the story about Paul Rusesabagina is fiction. Mm-hmm. Thank you for enjoying the movie.
Right.
But none of those qualifiers were there. None.
So you're saying that it says based on a true story?
No, it does not.
Okay.
That's the
All
amazing
right.
part. We wish it would.
Right.
Even if that would have been the lowest bar they should have gone for. Mm-hmm. But they didn't even go for that. I've seen the movie, every frame of the movie, 100 times. They never once put in frame those words, based on or inspired by, never. Okay.
So, as you are an author who does your research and writes the truth, because that's what you're after, as a person who's a filmmaker, what is his goal?
To make money and to entertain people.
So basically, it's just a matter of sensationalizing a story.
I don't even know if that's the best word. I think we have to understand that there's a problem here that Hollywood is not in the education business. Mm-hmm. It's never claimed to be in the education business. Mm-hmm. And so there's definitely a disconnect somewhere. Well, first off, I don't know if Hollywood is wise in taking on subjects that are fact-based when they know that their entire formula is entertainment-based. And with regard to our beef that the movie is being used in classrooms, again, Hollywood didn't make this movie to be put into a classroom. Mm-hmm. Hollywood has no journalistic responsibility. I think they should when they make movies. There's been some complaints about other recent movies, Captain Phillips, The Great Debaters, a few other things. And again, I'm not going to get into a whole diatribe talking about those specific films. I'm not even totally aware of the arguments on both sides with regards to other films. But they do walk into a very dangerous area when they make it seem like they're on the same level as a book or as a news program, newspaper, what have you. So here you've got this Hollywood product that's then being taken out of its entertainment context, put into a classroom. And, I could do a diatribe against teachers who are doing this, but let's face it, students like to watch movies. Some of them won't read the book, but they'll watch the movie.
Right.
And it's great in the sense that it gets their attention, but not if it's something that is, again, totally fact-free, and you've got teachers who maybe aren't aware of it or just don't bother to say, oh, by the way, this part of the movie is true, pay attention to it. This part of the movie is utterly not true, please don't take this to the bank.
Right. It's almost as if, and I don't know if this is a good comparison, but it almost sounds like a child being raised to believe something that's really not true or appropriate, and then you're putting this film in a classroom where basically you're doing the same thing. You're saying, students, here's something that I'm going to teach you. Here, and use this for the rest of your life. Why is it that people go to school? Why is it that people educate themselves? Why is it that people read? Because they want to be knowledgeable in whatever it is that they're studying or learning, correct?
Sesame Street is wonderful, but of course we also know there are no animals known as snuffleupaguses.
Yes.
And big birds do not talk. But I think that's so far off the beaten path of truth and fact and reality that kids are able to make that connection, or if not, their parents can help them. But in a situation like Hotel Rwanda, there's not that ability because, frankly, ours is the first book that's come out in America that has stated, excuse me, but 90% of this film is untrue. And having had discussions where I brought this up to teachers, they went, oh, really? I didn't know that. There are study guides that are now been created for this movie, none of which say, oh, by the way, this part is totally untrue. And we prove the case throughout the entire book. We prove the case that the Rusesabagina storyline is completely and utterly untrue. He did not single-handedly save 1,200 people, which is how he advertises all of his personal appearances, and he makes many. But it's always with that caveat saying this is who he is.
Did you have to go there in order for you to write the book, or you just wrote this
Did I
book
go
here?
to Rwanda?
Yeah.
No, I actually have not. I have been talking to people who are still living in Rwanda. I have been talking to Rwandans who have moved to Europe, United States, Canada, but no, I personally have not, because again, it's not from my point of view. It's not my personal story. I'm helping accommodate the story of Edward, who again is native Rwandan, was born and raised there, has only been living in the United States for about 12 years, 12, 13 years.
So he found you, basically.
That is correct.
Okay. So, wait, here's my other question to you. Well, I think it elaborates more on what it is that we're talking about. Did the book involve a special research? I think one of the questions was, did you go to Rwanda? You said no.
Yes.
What other research did the book require for you to put it together? Is it just his story alone? Is it other people's stories or accountability of being there and having experienced?
It was, a large part of it, of course, is Edward's personal story. It's the personal story of a number of other Rwandans who were in the hotel, and that includes Hutu and Tutsi alike that are still alive. He conducted some of those interviews. I conducted some interviews. UN peacekeepers, who were in fact one of the biggest reasons why people survived in that hotel. But of course that's utterly minimized in the movie, and it's completely, it's more than minimized when Rusesabagina speaks publicly. He pretty much almost denies that the UN was even there or had any presence whatsoever. So I've been talking to those people here. There are people that I went off on my own and met with and spoke with also in doing my research. But again, doing it from here.
Right.
I mean, again, we live in a world where, through the internet, through Skype, what have you, I mean, we can reach people all over the world. So I look forward to someday going to Rwanda. I've been able to meet so very, very many people, again, via the internet, who live in Rwanda. There's some wonderful people, and they've all invited me to come there and see them someday. So I hope to be doing that sometime soon.
That's so sweet. In writing this particular book, how did it affect you personally? Did it give you ill feelings? Did it give you good feelings? I mean, you have to be writing, and this is what I believe because I write as well. And when I'm writing, because I've been writing my own life story book for, a couple of years now, and some parts are really difficult to write. So I don't deal with it at that moment, which is not good. So when you're writing somebody else's story and it's giving you like some kind of feelings, like how do you push through that so that you're able to convey that person's feelings through you? Because wouldn't you say you're kind of like the portal or the muse that they're using so that you're able to write those words that are going to touch somebody else when they're reading that book?
The answer is, I mean, the strongest emotion that I felt throughout this entire project was anger. There were so many times I just felt so angry. And yes, there's the obvious anger of writing about genocide, this incredibly horrific thing that involves not only brutal murder targeted against the unarmed, but also rape is an incredible weapon of genocide. And people really don't talk about that very much, but it is a weapon. Women were not just simply murdered, but beyond the murders of men, women were sexually assaulted in the most horrific ways that I can't even speak about before they were finally mercifully killed. They were begging for death. So you get that anger. You also get anger. I got anger, again, writing about the spin and the lies that were told by Rusesabagina as he was trying to make himself into this hero, which he wasn't. And most importantly, with regard to Paul, is what he has done with his fame, which is that his ideology has always been linked up with the Hutu power leaders, which are the people who were committing the genocide. These were his friends. He was politically active. And again, people who interviewed him prior to the movie coming out or during around the time, so many people were completely unaware that he was a political person before the genocide.
Right.
And his political affiliations were radical before the genocide even began. This has been hushed up. We bring it out. Again, we had people who were also affiliated in these same political parties who said, yes, he was there, yes, he was active, he held office within, a political party. That was very radical. And now that he has fame, his associations are all with those same people who are still alive, who are using him as this humanitarian, smiling face who is helping lead them politically into an overthrow of the current Rwandan government, which is led by the person who led the army that ended up stopping the genocide of '94. So it's very, very dangerous stuff that we're dealing with here. Hotel Rwanda has the possibility, by virtue of taking this particular person from obscurity. Paul Rusesabagina, before this movie was made, was driving a taxi cab in Brussels. They've taken this guy, made him into a worldwide celebrity who now preaches and helps lead a movement to overthrow the current government. And there is no such a thing in Africa as a peaceful overthrow of a government. Not when your muscle is the FDLR with its child soldiers.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I was watching something earlier today on the Travel Channel with I forget his name. Anyway, it's not really that important. But my point is that he talks about mysteries inside the museum. And one of the things, you know, a lot of us visit museums, we see things and, you know, we see the little blurb of what it's about. He goes into a little bit more detail because, of course, he's traveling all around the United States with these different types of things that he's talking about within the show. Dan Wildman, that's his name. So he had bought out this machine, and apparently it's like one of those shock machines. And he was talking about a person who put this machine together and then puts an ad in the paper. We're looking for people to do tests on, and you get $4. This is back in the 60s, so of course $4 was probably a lot of money back then, as opposed to now where $4 is really nothing. So basically what he did was he had a teacher and a student. The teacher did not see the student. The questions were a series of memorization. So the teacher would repeat a set of words, and then the student would have to repeat back those words. Now, mind you, the student and the teacher were not in the same room. The teacher heard through the speaker the student. If the student at some point forgot the pair of the words, then the teacher would induce a shock thing. And he would hear, like, you know, after a while, you know what I'm talking about, right? After a while, they would start getting it wrong, and he would be talking about how he's going to raise the shock value. And I was like, wow, this is like crazy. Because first and foremost, why would somebody want to induce that kind of pain on somebody else and hear their screams through the thing, even though they're not seeing them with their eyes? They're hearing the screams, which for me would be enough. Like, I couldn't induce any kind of pain on anything.
It's a famous experiment because it all had to do with learned sadism.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
And then come to find out that in the experiment, the person that was getting the shock really wasn't getting it. they were just acting the whole thing.
It was an experiment.
The experiment was on the teacher to see how far they would go. And I think they said more than 65% of the people that were involved in this experiment didn't have a problem putting shock to people that they thought that they were shocking on the other side. I'm like, wow. So in the 60s, everybody was really sick, and they're more sick now. What does that say about our society today? I mean, it's like, you know, to have an experiment like that done here, and I think it even tied into, unless I'm like bringing up something else, but like a man who was involved in the Nazi. I mean, for me, it's not human to do something to another person, to inflict some kind of pain on them, and then not think twice about it.
It's group hysteria in the case of genocide. We're talking, and something I sometimes have a little bit of frustration with Americans, especially having made so many Rwandan friends during the 6 or 7 years we've been working on this book, is that this is not an uncivilized culture. And unfortunately, Americans can hear a story like this or see the movie, and they'll say, well, you know, that's those people, and they're, you know, savages or something, and it really galls me, because it's not that at all. And it's not that culturally they're really that different than anywhere else in the world, including America. Group hysteria is what it is. And we saw it in Nazi Germany. I mean, this is a Western nation. Germany, was part of the modern world, the civilized world, before, after World War II, and yet during Nazism, how did suddenly all these German citizens become part of this horrific regime? The answer is that, again, through propaganda, through hate speech, and then once the killing begins, it becomes too easy. I even remember back during the Manson family trials, where they were talking to those who were actually committing the murders, I believe 3 young women. They talked, kind of remorsefully of their thoughts before committing the murders, but then once they actually started striking with their knives, how after the first strike it became very easy. And that's what you're talking about. And this is the same thing with the genocide against the Tutsi. People were handed machetes. They were pumped full of hate speech. They were told every horrific thing in the world. And they were sent to murder their neighbors. This wasn't even like, okay, all of us in the Hutu tribe, we're all in this town, and all of those in the Tutsi ethnicity, they're all in that town. Let's all storm that other town. No, we're talking about neighbor against neighbor. People were handed lists going, here are the people in your neighborhood that you have to help us kill. And they weren't sent out by themselves. It was gangs, and people would go along with the gangs, and it just, after a while, they became kind of drunk on the whole concept. It became too darn easy. They're walking their own streets, and there's body parts everywhere, and after a while, they just became numb to it. It's the most terrifying thing that we could ever imagine, and we would always say that could never happen in a Western nation such as America. It could.
But
it could happen anywhere.
It
It
happens.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like if you just turn on the ID network, you see it, and people are doing it to each other.
Certainly.
And it's not, a matter of just targeting a group of people. I mean, you have serial killers, you have people that get angry for no apparent reason and then just kill them because of, stupid reasons.
Well, what about the lynchings that were throughout the Jim Crow South? I mean,
Exactly.
so we have had it here in America.
So we're not, in other words, we're not exempt.
Absolutely
We're not exempt. We're not the people sitting here in this country looking at other countries saying, oh wow, look at what's happening over there, when it's basically happening in our own backyard.
Oh, we are saying it. It's just not true. It's not true. It can happen. It has happened in our own backyard. Slavery, Jim Crow. And it can erupt at any time, anywhere, including U.S., Canada, Europe, again, Germany, perfect example there.
Now, when is the book available? The book is out?
The book comes out March 25.
Okay.
And which is kind of a special date for us, not March 25 specifically, but April is the month. April will mark the 20th anniversary of the beginning of the genocide. The genocide went from April 7th, technically, until the middle of July. It was 100 days. 1 million people were murdered in 100 days. It is the most brutally efficient genocide in the history of mankind. Other genocides did have a higher body count. I mean, the Holocaust, 6 million. But that was over a much longer period of time.
Right.
100 days, 1 million people. It's absolutely unfathomable.
What do you expect to get out of the book once it comes out?
We're really hoping that, for one thing, it lets people know what really happened in that hotel, which is being held up as the true story of the genocide. It has given a soapbox to a person who politically was aligned, and continues to be aligned with those who committed the genocide. And we hope it really just finally takes the spotlight off of him as he continues today to spread pretty much the same sort of hate speech that was spread that led up to the genocide of '94. Granted, it's a little bit more soft-pedaled as it comes out of his mouth, but he's representing those same people. We want people to know who he is, what his whole story is, politically and otherwise, and also that he did not single-handedly save 1,200 people, and instead turns things around to, okay, now we've set that aside, let's instead talk about genocide, let's talk about hate, let's talk about peace throughout Africa, throughout the world. We hope that that's really, and also this whole concept of showing Hollywood movies of any sort in American classrooms, in place of real learning from books, from documentaries. I'm bullish on documentaries because they are held to more of a journalistic level of integrity. A Hollywood drama is held to no level of journalistic responsibility.
Right.
That's a problem, and that's why they do not belong in classrooms.
Okay. Where can we find your past works and your future works, for that matter?
Well, Amazon.com is always a perfect place. Inside the Hotel Rwanda will be available also not only on your online retailers, but also, of course, in bookstores all across the nation. We're going to be featured throughout the month of April in the biggest Barnes & Noble stores across the nation. We're going to be right there when you walk right in. So it'll be very easy to find at your Barnes & Noble superstores, as well as, again, other major retailers.
Are you prepared for any type of backlash with this type of book?
It's already started.
Okay.
I must say that for as much as I have a lot of good friends, both in Rwanda as well as throughout the United States, who are very supportive of the message of the book and politics of the book as they are, there's, of course, definitely those who are very anti-Tutsi, who support the ideology of Paul Rusesabagina, the Hutu power ideology that is still simmering out there. And I've gotten a lot of hate on social media for that. I sat down with a very erudite French diplomat who gave me a lot of background into the story, a lot of things that I discovered, because unfortunately France, to be honest, was backing the people who were committing the genocide in Rwanda in '94. He, in particular, though, resigned from his position as a government advisor over the genocide, and I give him kudos for that. But he told me, and we were sitting right here in Harlem, right where we are today, a few blocks away, we were sitting in a cafe, and he said, well, have you gotten your first death threats yet? What? And he said, well, I came out with a book also, and I received death threats. And then he went on to go into specificity of like, well, here's what you do. If you're in America, everything should be fine. They usually don't have enough guts to try and kill you right here in the States. If you're in Europe, you may get contacted by Interpol. And he's telling me
now it sounds like a James Bond movie.
It does. And he said, well, I was contacted by Scotland Yard and by Interpol, and they may do that. And in general, though, you're pretty cool in Europe, I just wouldn't go out alone at night.
Right.
And then in Africa, he said, well, it's going to vary country by country. In Rwanda itself, the president has a pretty good internal police force, and your book tends to treat him kindly in general, so he'll probably look out for you and wouldn't want anything to happen to you there. But if you go to some other countries, watch it, because that's where they really like to, take out their hits. So it's that was frightening to hear, as an American who's not used to
because
hearing
you're
things
an
like
author
this.
and you're trying to convey a story. You don't expect for your story to
come with warnings.
Right.
That,
Exactly.
watch out for hit squads. Yeah.
Exactly. Kerry, thank you so much for appearing on our show.
Thank you.
And I wish you a lot of success on your book.
Thank you.
And everything else that you do in the future. And what can I say? Another controversial show, which I totally love. This is Marabelle Blues signing off. And we will be back very soon because we have a lot of things lined up for future shows. So we'll see you.